Marry People's Business. I'm Michael Tolbert. I'm here with my beautiful co-host.
I'm Shalise Tolbert, and thank you so very much, handsome co-host.
Oh, I appreciate that, sweetheart. And we're here to give you always the best, most up-to-date content that impact married people's couples and people that are collaborating. And what are we going to talk about today?
Well, you know what's trending today?
Oh, I do, unfortunately.
Our body shaming claims BS.
Our body shaming claims BS.
Yeah, you know this thing that's going on right about now, this lawsuit against Lizzo, man. It's crazy.
And you're a good Christian woman because, you didn't want to you don't want to spell out the BS in the BS.
You know, I didn't, but, I don't know how else to describe it,
Oh, man. Well, a lot of people are wondering what's going on with Lizzo. And if you've been under a rock for the last week,
days.
Our good friend Lizzo has gotten into a little bit of trouble in terms of some of the language and some of the way that she's talked to some of her employees and the people that she's employed, particularly dancers. And what we're going to do on this episode of this podcast, we're going to talk about body shaming, which has been a big problem and a big issue, I would say, in American culture and really across the world. And you might be asking yourself, why are we talking about this on Married People's Business? You want to tell them why?
Well, this doesn't just impact us on a societal level. It does impact us when it comes to employment, when it comes to legislature and changing of laws. So this isn't just about, making people feel bad and not discrediting that. But this goes a little beyond that because you'd be surprised at how much it expands into our everyday lives of work and play.
Yeah, and I think, you always do things so professionally and in an articulate way. And I like to get right to the meat of to the jugular. We just want to tell y'all how to talk around people and how not to say crazy things. Because crazy things or things that people, the important part is people, what people perceive to be as crazy, can get you terminated, can get you fired. And Lord, that man with his nice little job at the Ford factory or at Chrysler or in a law firm or in any type of a business setting, making nice money, and he says something to one of his coworkers like, "Why are you eating that donut?" Or, "Man, you look good today." Things like that used to be commonplace maybe 5-10 years ago are no longer commonplace. And body shaming is a topic that is broad, that has far-reaching scope, and it can really cause you to lose your job and really affect your livelihood. And that's what Married People's Business is all about, is giving you the tools to be able to navigate these treacherous waters, to be able to keep your employment, to be able to thrive, and just to be able to continue to grow and collaborate with others in a functional way.
And along the lines of what you were saying, what may have been acceptable, I think that we have to point out too how society has changed. It's not only about what's happening in our work lives, but how society has changed as to what may be offensive and what is not, appropriate to say to someone, whether it's at work or just in your daily lives. And, that's what is kind of the crux of this lawsuit against Lizzo.
Well, let's talk about the lawsuit against Lizzo for the people that are watching and listening. Lizzo.
Yes.
Lizzo she's a singer, and
right.
She has dancers that I always thought was pretty cool because these are dancers that didn't necessarily fit the mold of what you would normally see in dancers.
Right.
They're not these little small petite people. They were people that really... it's really strange that Lizzo is being charged and is being sued for body shaming because really her dancers were not reflective of any type of body shaming. She was really trying to put out into, culture that, hey, you can be a big girl and dance and move, right?
And that's what I was going to say. For those who are not familiar with Lizzo is she's self-proclaimed herself with a company called Big Girls.
Mm-hmm.
But Lizzo is a larger woman, and she's been very positive about her body and bringing others on to her team that are reflective of the same type a body.
That's right.
And
so
promoting body positivity.
That's right. So the lawsuit is brought by 3 dancers that don't necessarily fit what what society would tell us. When you see Beyonce dancers or and my man Luke dances.
Oh gosh, you just dated yourself by saying Luke dancers. But pop culture
dancers. These are 3 dancers
victims
that danced with Lizzo on tour. She would take them on tour, and you know. We pulled the lawsuit. The lawsuit that was filed against Lizzo is probably about 40 pages long. Yeah. And you know, married people's business. At the core of us, we're lawyers, so that's what we do by trade. So we really geek out on these types of really nerdy things. So we just couldn't talk about this lawsuit without actually reading it. So we read all 40 pages of the lawsuit, and the lawsuit is very complicated, but the part that deals with today's podcast on body shaming was one count that dealt with discrimination. And Lizzo's dancers pretty much said that Lizzo created an environment that wasn't necessarily conducive to women that were larger, or that were not small. So I guess Lizzo had a private meeting with one of her dancers, and she kind of questioned the dancer about the dancer's ambition and her inability to be very upbeat and to be very spunky and to be very energetic. And that dancer took that probing and that inquiry about her energy level to mean that I think the lawsuit actually said a veiled probe into her weight. Into her inability to be energetic and spunky, because the stereotype against people that are larger in weight is that they are lazy, that they are not spunky, that they're not energetic. So that was the language, which I thought is fascinating in the case, and which is very important for this podcast, is that I don't necessarily think that the conversations that you believe that you're having with people are a lot of times what the people perceive those conversations to be. Because what was interesting about the lawsuit and about the exchange, Lizzo never called the young lady fat. She never specifically said a derogatory word, expressly a derogatory word in terms of her weight. She just questioned her commitment level, essentially, and whether or not she had the energy to keep up on tour.
Right. I don't think she said anything about her weight.
No.
But it was alleged in the complaint that Lizzo was pressuring and body shamed, I think, that same dancer, because this lawsuit involves 3 separate dancers.
That's right.
But I think it was the same dancer that she was basically body shaming her for weight gain before she later fired her.
And she asked the dancer about her weight gain before one of the tour stops, before the private meeting. So the conversation that she had privately, in conjunction with the probe about, hey, I see you're gaining a little weight, is what tipped this dancer off to believe that at the end of the day she was fired before the lawsuit. All 3 dancers were fired, and then they turned around and sued Lizzo for a host of claims, one of being disability discrimination, partly because of their weight.
Yeah, which is amazing to me, because I never, we've been practicing 23 years. I never thought about weight being a disability. No.
And the lawsuit was filed in I believe, Los Angeles Superior Court. It was filed in California. And it was filed under the California Penal Code. So it looks like it was in state court. It's not in federal court. But there are sexual harassment claims. There's an assault claim, because I guess Lizzo got into a fight or almost got into a fight with one of the dancers. And there are a host of claims, but the claim that is very important for this discussion is the disability claim.
Yeah.
And for those of you who don't know the general law on disability, we're not going to turn this into a CLE, right? We're going to give you a high-level review of kind of what the state of body shaming is in terms of it being a recognizable cause of action under our laws. And currently, right now, most federal courts do not, and I repeat, do not acknowledge obesity as a recognizable protected class. So, for example, in Title VII, if you're on a job or if you work, if you have a job or employed, employers cannot discriminate against you based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation. Those are called protected classes. Okay. Right now, under Title VII, obesity is not a protected class. Now, fast forward to the American with Disabilities Act, which prohibits discrimination based on disability. So you cannot discriminate against someone if they have a recognizable disability under the ADA. The EEOC guidelines does not actually carve out obesity as a disability or a condition that is recognizable under the ADA. However, there are a lot of states, which is important for you all who are watching and listening, there are a lot of states that have said foo-foo with Title VII and foo-foo with the ADA, and they have taken on their own role in terms of trying to carve out this kind of exception to the rule and provide protection for people that have fallen victim of body shaming, like the dancers in allegedly like the dancers in the Lizzo lawsuit.
Well, I think that it's important to recognize the difference. And the difference is that, the federal courts have the power to create those classes, those protected classes, but they've chosen not to because I think this is very subjective. It's very subjective, not only in the legal front, but on the societal front. Like, one of the things that I found interesting was that there was an article, I think, that we found from a human resources organization where an individual had cupcakes or something at work. And I think it was a lady that was a larger lady that offered one to her coworker who declined it and said, no, I'm trying to go to the beach this weekend. I don't think I should. Well, the employee that offered the cupcake reported the employee that declined the cupcake to HR saying she was body shaming her. I'm like, where's the body shaming in that? Like, because I refused a cupcake and said, oh, I'm trying to go to the beach this weekend. I'm watching what I eat. That's body shaming the person that offered it to me?
That's cupcake shaming. So,
I say all of that to indicate I think that the federal government's, the federal laws the courts are staying out of it and not creating the laws because it's very subjective, and that was very subjective to me.
Well, I think I remember reading that article, and I think what you're referring to is the Society for Human Resource Management organization.
Yeah.
It's an organization called SHRM, where employers essentially look for guidance in terms of employment policies. There's really good information if you're interested. Go on SHRM's website, and they give you articles and they'll give you tips in terms of public policy when you're making your employment manuals and how you operate in the employment space.
Right.
So SHRM is a really good resource for that. But what you're referring,
if you don't mind, I just want to say the letters. This SHRM, SHRM.
Yeah, SHRM. So if you want to go on SHRM's website, you can do that. But the article that you're referring to really really highlighted a very important part, which is important for our listeners and for people who are watching this, is I think the days of you believing that something is appropriate or inappropriate, those days are out the door, because it's the perception of the perceived of the victim that's very important. So that's very important for people who are watching this and who are listening to this. If you want to keep your job, if you want to make sure that you do not say anything inappropriate, particularly in the body shaming arena, you have to erase and scrub your mind out of, well, I don't believe that had anything to do with body shaming, because it's not about you. It's about the person who's listening to the comment. And the cupcake comment, the young lady believed that the implication behind I do not want a cupcake, she believed that impliedly meant that by not having a cupcake made the person who refused the cupcake, made her feel better from a body standpoint. better than the person eating the cupcake. So if you're the person that's hearing all of this, you're saying, well, this is just about a cupcake. Well, no, it's not just about a cupcake. It's about the listener and the person who heard the comment and how they took the comment to mean. So what SHRM has, and we'll get into this a little bit later in terms of what SHRM's recommendations are, because I think SHRM offers all of us some really, really, really good guidance on how we should operate and how we should we almost have to learn a new language, because there's just certain things that we just can't say in the workplace or say in societal settings, because they could get you in trouble, could lose a job, could lose your livelihood. And that's what we don't want you to do on Married People's Business. We want to make sure that people stay gainfully employed so that you can continue to collaborate.
Right.
But one of the things that I do want to point out is I want people to understand where we are legally. So the federal courts in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and some municipalities, including New York, have recognized weight as a potential disability under anti-discrimination laws. And the vast majority of our federal courts and state courts still hold that weight is not disability. So what you have to be aware of is where you are, okay? So as it stands right now, Michigan is the only state that technically has banned height. This is very important. Height and weight discrimination. That's the only state that's the only state right now currently that has a law on the books, not an ordinance, but something that's gone through the legislature on the books that says it is against the law pretty much to discriminate in housing and employment based on somebody's height, which is I always thought was kind of interesting, because if you're people getting refused housing because they short, I never heard of that, but that's a whole nother thing.
You know, I'm vertically challenged over here.
so I'm not terribly tall, but I'm a nice size, but so I never had anybody call me short, but that's for a whole nother podcast. But in Michigan, you know, if you too short, I shouldn't even say that. If you are short,
vertically challenged,
you can't. There's a law in the books that protects you, and there's a law in the books that protects you if you are overweight, and if you sense that somebody's discriminating against you in housing and in employment because of weight. So Michigan's the only place on the books right now, right?
And what's so interesting about Michigan is that Michigan's law goes back 47 years. Yeah. Year after I was born. Yeah. I mean, it goes back to that. It's the only state that's had it that long. Massachusetts has something in the legislature that was introduced this year that would make them the second ever state behind Michigan to ban size discrimination in areas including the workplace and housing.
That's correct.
So it's on its way, but this apparently is not a new thing, particularly for Michigan. We're talking about Midwest, the state just north of us. 2 hours, north, you can hit the Michigan state line. 4 hours, you're in Detroit.
That's right. So that's why it's very important when you're. Really, I prescribe that you should just operate from a space of just kind of sanitizing your conversation and your communications with people, because things are changing and we just can't have the same conversations. But if you're loose lips, if you're a loose lips kind of person, then, we're trying to let you know exactly what the law is and where you are. So right now, New York City Council, I believe in May of 2023, they passed a ordinance that prohibited employment discrimination based on height and weight. So they're trying to follow suit with Michigan, and also places like San Francisco, New York, again, we already talked about, and Wisconsin, and also Illinois have also attempted to pass similar ordinances. And District of Columbia, Florida, Montana, New Jersey, Oregon, Washington have all held in some reported state court cases that obesity could be an actual or perceived disability under the ADA, even in the absence of physiological disorder or condition.
So what I'd like to point out too, and then after this I have something that's not so legal to say. But what I'd like to point out, an ordinance is just for that municipality, that city, that town. So those ordinances where we're talking about the New York City Council or what they're doing in San Francisco, or I think it was Binghamton,
Yeah.
Binghamton, New York, and
I think
Madison,
that's how you say
Wisconsin.
that. Sorry for people who from New York listening to this. We
Binghamton,
probably said
yeah.
that wrong, but that's all right.
I'm sorry, we're Midwest.
Midwest.
You know,
Yeah, that's right.
I apologize. No offense. We're not trying to shame anybody.
No.
And Urbana, Illinois. You know, those are just those towns, those cities passing those ordinances. But backing up to, you know, having these state law cases saying that something is similar to the ADA, even absent some underlying disorder or condition, it's just amazing to me because as you were describing, you know, you've got to sanitize yourself and watch what you're saying. You can't even have normal, what you perceive to have been normal conversation with people anymore. Because, I mean, I hate to go back to this, but this cupcake thing is blowing my mind. It's really just weird to me to hear that. So I think there was something else, you know, that was, when we bring it back to our everyday lives and or even conversation that you have with your coworkers or what employers have to listen for when somebody's going to report a coworker for saying something that they think was implied. You know, it's like, wow, I can't compliment somebody to say, oh man, you've lost some weight, you look good, or, you know, acknowledging that they lost weight by saying that they look good or something to that extent, not talking about sexual harassment, but just commenting on their body at all. And, you know, it's taken away from us being nice people, too. It's not only about the negative comments, it's about the positive comments. So how does this look when Lizzo is a person in pop culture that has had some influence being positive about body type? And then these three dancers are saying, oh, no, she's body shaming us.
Right. So I would say more on the technical standpoint. We talked about the state law. We talked about Massachusetts. We talked about Michigan and kind of what the local municipalities in your state may be doing. But there's also another layer to this, which are the federal courts. So our federal courts, not to get, again, too geeky or nerdy, our federal courts are broken up in circuits. So you have the, you know, Seventh Circuit, which is the circuit that Shalise and I practice in, which includes Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. That would be considered the Seventh Circuit. The Eighth Circuit, which would be considered Arkansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Missouri, Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota. 11th Circuit is Alabama, Florida, and Georgia, and so forth. But it's very important to know that the majority of the federal courts, particularly the circuits that I talked about, they hold that obesity is not a physical impairment under the ADA. What that means is that technically, if you're an employer in those circuits, as well as some other circuits that I didn't name, just not to go through them all, the majority of the courts, if you were sued as an employer or supervisor under the ADA because somebody felt like you discriminated against them based on obesity, those federal courts would not, if the case was filed in federal court, would not recognize that claim, and that claim probably would be dismissed. So that's a very important fact. But the point I want to drive home is kind of where Shalise is going, because I think that we operate in really two different worlds when it comes to appropriateness. We operate in the legal world, which is, hey, what we do is compliance to our checks and balances in our world, which the law is the checks and balances. The law is what keeps order. The law is what tells us what we can or can't do, and if we violate those laws, then we can have a penalty. Then the second kind of area that we live in is kind of the moral stratosphere, which is even if something is legal, or I should say that, yeah, even if something is legal, even if you can say something and not be sued for it under Title VII or under the ADA, or it's technically not a violation of some express statute or ordinance, there still is a societal penalty that people have to be aware of. And I think that's the gray area that folks have to really, really, really understand, because although it's just like right now, if some person wanted to come up to me and call me colored, a colored person, right? They have they're well within their rights under the First Amendment to express what they have to say and call me whatever they want to call me. But the moral checks and balances would tell them that that's not right. And there are penalties morally and societally, if that's a word. I think I just made that up, but that's okay.
Y'all know what I mean.
Yeah, right. Y'all know what I mean. There's certain society penalties and ramifications for not necessarily understanding that what you say and what you do can be appropriate. So although I do agree with Shalise, we are walking a fine line in society right now.
Yeah.
But I think the line on Married People's Business and what we're really trying to identify for you is that line, and trying to give you some tips and tools so that you don't cross the line, because crossing the line could mean that you could lose a job. It could mean that you could lose standing if you were part of a country club, or if you're part of a Rotary, or if you're part of a organization. Like Lizzo is an upstanding person who stood for anti-body shaming. Now, all of that work that she's done over those years is lost because of maybe one comment or because of something that was maybe taken out of context. So it's very important for us to understand that. And that takes us to the SHRM article in the example.
Right. And so with Lizzo, this lawsuit is filed against her, but you bring up a point that, she may have made one comment. The rest of the allegations, because we read the whole complaint, are not even against Lizzo personally. It's against her company. It's against the manager. So she and her brand are affected by this, when she's been about body positivity.
You sound like you a Lizzo advocate. Like if Lizzo's listening to this, it sounds like you pitching for Lizzo to hire Tober to Tober.
Well, I mean, you know what? She can't. I don't know much about Lizzo at all, honestly. But this is intriguing to me.
It is an intriguing case.
It's very intriguing.
And we'll
to
be
me.
watching it. We'll be watching it. And
so when you go back to SHRM, I say that because Lizzo is an employer.
Right.
She's employing these people. She's employing the manager or the supervisor that was in charge that most of the allegations are against.
And maybe that's where your passion, maybe that's where I hear the passion coming from your voice, because Tobert and Tober, typically we represent employers in this context when employers are sued for discrimination. You actually tried you had a jury trial it was an age discrimination case. So you putting on your lawyer hat right now. You defending Lizzo right now. I see.
Well, maybe that is it. But I'm trying to get the perspective from both sides, because as an employee coming in to say, the SHRM article talking about the cupcake and I refuse it, I haven't said anything about you, coworker. I'm saying something that I'm choosing not to do. And then the coworker that made the offer makes an HR complaint against me. So I'm saying it, from all perspectives, where we as people have to be conscious of how we are talking to one another.
I agree. And I would say, to close this podcast out and really to fulfill the purpose of what we wanted to really make sure that we impressed upon people who are watching and people who are listening, is a couple of tips and recommendations. And some of these that I just think I came up with on my own, but some of this is basically from the research that we've done, because we always want to make sure that we give you grounded material that's objective and independent. And I think the SHRM resource is a highly, highly respectable resource in the employer context, because it kind of tells you how things work in the workplace, where a lot of you who are listening and watching this you have jobs, you have businesses. So this is what SHRM says. So SHRM suggests creating an environment where commenting on other people's bodies and complimenting them for weight loss is highly, highly discouraged. So what SHRM would say is any conversation surrounding weight loss or body type or working out or diet culture, food. Any of those things open up a Pandora's box that someone that may be obese or that may be overweight can perceive that to be a form of body shaming. So what they would suggest is that you don't do those things. Yep. The other thing that I thought, and this is more from a employer's context, the other thing that I thought was very fascinating about the SHRM recommendation was that SHRM believes that even if you are in a state like we are in Indiana, or in the Seventh Circuit, Indiana, Illinois, Wisconsin, even though our federal courts don't necessarily recognize obesity as a protected class or as obesity as a ADA disability that could trigger Title VII or ADA violations or complaints, they suggest that you put that in your handbook. Now, I don't necessarily, I'm putting on my lawyer hat here because we draft employment handbooks for clients, and from my standpoint, I think we always want to make sure that we do not obligate our employers or our clients to a something that's not necessarily law yet. So we monitor it, we watch it, but you got to be careful because that becomes a slippery slope when you start putting things in an employment handbook that's technically not recognized by a Seventh Circuit or any state court. But SHRM suggests that, in some of these outlier jurisdictions where obesity ordinances are not in place, that you should put something in your handbook that tells people that, obese people, that this is a safe workplace and that there will not be any decisions or any action taking against them, any adverse action, I think is the Title VII terminology, against them because of weight or obesity. So that's a recommendation that they have suggested.
And not to, backtrack on what you're saying, but I think they make the term even broader by saying weight discrimination.
Right.
Because body shaming, as it is being constantly defined, is going both ways, whether it's someone being obese or someone being underweight, so to say.
Right. And I think the last tip I would give you for people who are watching and people who are listening, whether you're an employer or employee, this is something that I thought about, and also it falls right in line with what SHRM recommends, is they talk about zero tolerance. So what that means to me is just this: don't even mention it, don't even talk about it. And I know I had to catch myself because I'm an old Southern country boy. My family's from Alabama. So it's nothing for us to say sweetheart and to say, hey, little lady, you look nice today. That's just how I was raised and how I talk. But I've even had to change the way that I operate. So I don't comment on women's. I try not to comment on women's appearances or say anything that could be viewed as a body shaming moment. And I think that if you operate in that space where you're just not even having the conversations, it's just like some people say that you shouldn't talk about politics at work. I think is politics. And what's the other thing? Yeah, it's mostly politics.
Politics and religion.
Politics and religion. Yeah, you shouldn't talk about politics and religion. I would add that you should not talk about cupcakes.
But you know what?
You shouldn't talk about politics, religion, and cupcakes.
It's so, like, again, I'm tripping off this cupcake thing. I don't know, it's, because I like cupcakes a lot too. But, just even, you said, you try not to comment on women's appearances or whatnot, their bodies. But even with guys, like, can you say something to the guy that you work with now, hey, man, you buffing up, or you've been working out, and then that's like, what you doing?
Who are you saying that to?
No, I'm talking about men to other men.
Oh, okay, I got you.
Because you said
I'm
you
just
try to
trying
curb
make sure you ain't shooting your shot to somebody that I don't know about.
No, I'm not shooting my shot because I'm got already.
Okay, all right. Because if you say I'm buffing up, then I'll accept that.
I
would not view that as a body shaming incident.
But
I view that as a uplifting moment.
And that I cannot with you. But I'm gonna go back. So if you comment on somebody, about working out and you want to get tips, that's body shaming?
Yeah, that's body shaming.
I don't know the line.
Well, the problem is if you don't know the line. That's my it. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's part of the issue with the laws, because it's kind of hard to draw a line when you might be complimenting someone, or in your mind you think you're complimenting and it's perceived as body shaming. So I'm fascinated by this. Yet it's still evolving, so I'm learning.
Yes, you are learning. And I think because the line is gray, and I think I love this conversation and this dialogue because I hope when people understand when we put these programs, this content together, I have no clue what she's gonna say.
And I have no clue what he's
I don't know what her position is. I don't know what we come up with the topic because we want it to be fresh. And the reason we thought this would be this podcast generally, we love it is because we think differently, about a lot of different things. So my opinion, when you don't know what the line is, that's the very reason why you should really stay away from it, because when the line is gray, that means that perception becomes reality, and how people perceive things can be used against you. Just kind of like if you circle back to Lizzo, I guarantee you in a million years, Lizzo did not think that inquiring about that dancer's lack of energy and her inability to keep up with the steps, or some of the comments that she made, or even mentioned like, hey, I noticed that you are gaining a little bit of weight. Women talk like that all the time. I got 4 sisters, so I've heard my sisters say, hey, I see you gain weight, or are you okay? And kind of more as a consoling type inquiry. Concern, right. So the problem with that is that people can perceive that question or that probing in a different way. So the fact that you can't control how somebody else will receive that information is the very reason why the only way that you can control it not being viewed negatively is not to even put it out into the space.
I think you're right. I agree.
Right.
We'll cap it off.
And specifically, don't do it in the workplace, because the law's all over the place in terms of what's appropriate and what's not, what's appropriate and what's deemed not appropriate. And even in places, you could be in a jurisdiction where the law doesn't even outlaw body shaming or discrimination based on obesity, but you could have an employer that has gone the extra mile and said, yeah, even though the law doesn't require it, I'm still going to have this in my work culture. So you could get in trouble for something that's not even illegal.
Right. So that's the moral compass that you were talking about.
The moral compass. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
It wavers back and forth.
It does. It does. And Lizzo, yes, that is the end. We come to the end of this podcast, and I am so proud of my co-host, because I think she picked up a new client today.
Lizzo, call me, girl.
Girl, Lizzo is ringing the phone right now the way you was defending her. She is calling right now. She has sent you a few text messages.
Let me check. Let me see. Grab the phone before we get on off of there. But we always want everybody to know that we're going to give you all of the sides and be open about everything. So that's what we tried to do here today. Right.
So the recap is, people, I would say the main thing to take from this is just zero tolerance. Just be respectful. Understand that the words that you throw out there might be perceived to be something that maybe you didn't intend. So with that being said, keep it above board. Just try not to talk about anything that's going to be offensive to somebody, particularly as it relates to physical appearances or obesity. And you know what? You should be fine. And you're fine because we're fine, and because Married People's Business is giving you the tools and the tips to allow you to be fine. So thank you very much for tuning in. And we ask that you, before you cut your phone off or before you cut this video off, we ask that you like, and more importantly, subscribe so that you can get more helpful content like this.
Thanks for tuning in.
Take care.